to another edition of Coffee Talk. We're here today with the esteemed colleague in Canada, Brian Dingle, partner at one of the largest law firms in Canada, Borden, Ladner, and Gervais. My name is Patricia Gannon. I'm the partner here at Greenspoon Marder and the chair of the Immigration Division in New York.
My name is Marcela Bermudez, also partner at Greenspoon Marder in the Immigration Practice Group.
This is a very exciting time to talk about immigration with the US and Canada for a lot of reasons. One, in the United States forefront, we have the H1-B. We're going to talk a little bit about the H1-B, the takeaways from what Biden's doing. And also we have the inauguration, which, as everyone knows, is going to be uncertain, lots of changes, lots of speculation. On the Canadian side, we have Brian Dingle, who extraordinary immigration attorney in Canada, who's going to tell us all the fun facts of happening in Canada right now. And who's the prime minister right now?
Not sure.
That's it. That is a fun fact right there. Prime Minister of Canada? Question mark.
TBD.
To be determined.
It's not Wayne Gretzky.
It's not Wayne Gretzky, who, by the way, great hockey player. Great hockey player. You didn't know who Wayne Gretzky was?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I don't know anything about sports, but I know the name.
Okay. So one of the things that usually happens in the US, I would say, is about the cap. And where do people go when they don't get into the, well, let's talk about the cap. What do you think about the H1B cap?
Modernization. So what's new for us? We have the H1B modernization rule that has gone into effect or going into effect Jan 17. Gone into effect Jan 17. We have a new form. So there's some changes. There's a lot of changes overall. One of the important ones is they had implemented, not by rule, a deference to prior approvals. So if you were previously approved and you're applying for your extension, same petitioner, everything, same facts, you were requesting that the service give deference to that prior approval. With the modernization rule, it's now being codified, which is really a good thing. You've proven it once, everything's the same. Why are you not getting another approval? Why go into the extra effort of request for evidence and cost to an employer, to the client, when you've been previously approved? So that codification will help to aim and to streamline process and be a little more cost effective. That's on that. Other changes, important ones are the definition of specialty occupation. That's really a big one, where there was a lot of involvement from the bar, complaints and trying to get to a happy medium of the changes they wanted to make on the definition of specialty occupation. They've made it a little stricter, so we have to prove there's a direct relationship to the degree or the course of study to the position that's going to be filled. So you have to be very careful when you're drafting now with your petitions to make sure you're meeting that. When you have general degrees, more generic, the harder it's going to be to be able to pass that test.
How many do you think, who takes over the H1B cap? It started by regulation. It's been 85,000. Who is the big hog who takes it all? Amazon. Just, in case anyone's wondering, USCIS Employer Hub, it'll tell you everything, who gets it all. But I mean, what happens when it gets full again? Don't you think it's going to be full within a week, like usual, 10 days?
We're probably going to go through the same. So, and we had our neighbors where we're sending our folks to, right? Where would they go if you got, so, okay. So H1B lottery comes out, it gets full really fast. There might be a second counting. So you know how the lottery works. They count, you get oversubscribed, maybe 300, 400,000 applicants to occupy 85,000. Whatever's left over, some are fortunate to be able to move on to other types of visas, maybe an F1, extend their study, they're students forever in the US. And the others, we were sending them off to Canada. There was a relationship, but what are we gonna do now? Brian?
Are we going to send them to Canada? Everyone would wait it out in Canada. If I don't get in, I'll go to Canada.
It's interesting. And so yes, that's kind of how we've been looked at in the past, and it's not closed necessarily, but it has changed significantly. So when we did our last coffee talk, I was a bit giddy and silly about all the changes and pathways for people to come to Canada. And there has been a maelstrom essentially in Canada, completely independent, like separate and apart from what's going on in the United States politically and just from an H1-B perspective. So with the election of Mr. Trump and the expected changes that are going to come, not from merely an immigration perspective, but how it might impact your own citizens and their desire to come to Canada, perhaps as a safe harbor. We have had a fundamental shift in how we are doing immigration these days. So there's been a massive reduction in immigration levels proposed, not proposed, they will come into effect. So the 3-year plan had been 500,000 people, permanent residents, transition to permanent resident status for the next 3 years. In October of this year, it was announced that the numbers for 2025 would be reduced to 395,000, so a decrease of 105 from what was projected. In 2026, it's going to go down to 380,000, and in 2027 down to 365, so 365,000. So this is a fundamental shift away from what we were looking at. Now, this is permanent resident status. This isn't temporary necessarily. But whereas people would say, well, if I can't make it in the States, maybe I'll just park myself in Canada. I'll self-petition for permanent resident status. But, these changes are significant. Like these numbers are massive. And indeed, people who are already here who had anticipated that they're going to be able to transition to permanent resident status very easily from either, typically the path would be as an international student. Then, so you go to a 2-year or a 4-year program of study or something like that. You get a postgraduate work permit, which is equivalent to OPT or the like. And then often, without even the employer's support necessarily, they'd be able to transition to permanent resident status out of an OPT without having to get a green card sponsorship from an employer. That is no longer the case. It's not impossible, but the sheer numbers, just you're in big data kind of territory where the numbers just don't bear it out. You're not going to be able to transition most likely without something more. So there's a big crisis going on right now. And I would suggest, like we were joking about, who's the prime minister. So the prime minister will resign at the next party conference where they will elect a replacement. And his downfall, Trudeau's downfall, is in no small way on account of how they managed the immigration portfolio, to be perfectly frank. We lost control of the number of temporary residents coming in. So for instance, during the pandemic, or prior to the pandemic, I think our international student numbers were around 365,000 thereabouts. It ballooned to well over 1 million coming right out of the pandemic, because what we did on a temporary basis was to remove restrictions on hours of work for international students, such that it was a 20-hour cap per week for international students engaged in full-time study. Then, because there was a labor market shortage, because people weren't coming in, people weren't running restaurants, they weren't working in factories and helping deliver Amazon packages, things like that. What happened was there was no restriction on the hours of work for students. And so what happened was, what I understand is that people who would ordinarily not be able to get work permits for Canada were all of a sudden allowed to work full-time. Not only that, their spouses could come and work full-time. Their kids could come. Everybody would get health care. And then 18 months out of the pandemic, you're well over 1 million international students tearing around Canada, all expecting to transition to permanent resident status. Anyway, we lost control of the levers. We let in too many international students. Our housing starts, our housing stock was put under pressure. And now what's happening is you have a whole bunch of people who came here, some, I will say, quote, legitimately, others with a view to taking a course of study.
I wanted to ask you, when they came into Canada, mostly what areas of Canada did they go into?
Well, most of them come to Ontario.
Right.
It's like everybody going to Manhattan.
Yeah,
it's,
I know. Where are you going?
Country. It's a
I
bit-
don't know, Catskills, right? I don't know.
or like Idaho, Iowa, like there's lots of land out there, Montana. They're not
Yeah.
they're not working there necessarily. So what happened was we fundamentally lost control of who was coming in.
That
Many
happens
people
in a
were
lot of countries. You're not the only one.
agreed. We're just not used to this, and I think
Yeah.
it's not like you're doing an MBA at Columbia. You're not going to Cornell. You're going to a for-profit institution, which is, kind of, it's been described as the minister as like the equivalent, the degree or diploma equivalent of a puppy mill, whereby you just have a whole bunch of people who are coming in and then working in kind of jobs that were, not necessarily going to help the economy. And then everybody's expecting to be able to transition to permanent resident status. It was plain and obvious what was going to happen. I'm actually surprised that it was allowed to happen, but we did not have limits on temporary residents coming in as international students. We did on permanent resident status. We just kind of, I think we lost focus, and here we are.
I will say the students in the United States, how are they taxed? They're taxed a little differently. I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes an impact in Canada, but the students here don't have to pay social security taxes at all.
So you had a limit on permanent residency, how many numbers you can give for permanent residency, but there was no limit on transitioning from students to permanent residents.
Well, it was more a matter of there were no. It's like you have a cap on H1Bs, right? We have no such cap on kind of temporary residents. So in that sense, so what that would mean is,
Country caps.
we just like there was just no cap on international students, and so people saw this as an opportunity. Like people were desperate to come to Canada.
Should have gone.
Yeah, we as I think we joked the last time, we can still get you guys work permits if you'd like to come up, so long as you find an
Thank you.
employer. Because
Thank
you're
you,
both
Brian.
attorneys. We just need to get you licensed properly with the Law Society, and then you're good to go. But I think the thing is like many of the folks who are coming in on these international student programs are from countries that do not have free trade agreements with Canada. So we do have lots of free trade agreements. Like we have Colombia, we have the CPTPP, we have Peru, we have the European Union and the United Kingdom. So there's a bunch of options available to lots of folks to remain in different ways, like you might do under an E3 for Australia, or an E2 for whomever. There are a bunch of options.
Bunch
But
of
if you're
countries we have treaties with as well.
Right.
if you're coming
And
from
most
India,
of them, Western Europe.
yeah, if you're coming from India, if you're coming from China, if you're coming from the Philippines, these are not countries. Like they're great, they're tremendous source countries for permanent residents and for temporary workers in Canada, but we do not have free trade agreements with those countries, and therefore it's quite a bit more challenging for those individuals to be able to get work permits going forward, given what's happening. So, like there are significant policy shifts, caps on temporary residents, overhaul of the international student program, and there's reform to the temporary foreign worker program as well as the international mobility program. So the temporary foreign worker program, I think, is best likened to the H1B program in the United States, although it's not limited to specialty workers. So it includes like H2Bs and those sorts like lower level roles. But there's a great deal more emphasis on employer compliance and enforcement, and just weeding out the bad apples, because various things were put in place whereby, if you had an H1B kind of equivalent, you get additional points that could allow you to transition to permanent resident status. So we're getting rid of those that kind of those comprehensive ranking system points in the spring, as we understand it. On the international mobility program, which is exempt from the LMIA, that's not like you don't need an LCA. It's like an H1B, if you know what I mean, where you go kind of test the labor market, at least for salary and the like. We're restricting certain types of spousal open work permits and those available to common law partners. So international students may not allow or may not have their spouses and common law partners get open work permits. Certain types of roles will no longer be able to bring in spouses as well. They typically have to be professional in nature or managerial in nature, unless there's special occupations.
So just to be clear, Brian, you're saying that if you go to Canada, you may not be able to bring your spouse, which could be
You
a
can bring
bad
them.
thing.
You can bring them. They just can't work. So and Vancouver is and Toronto are almost as expensive as New York or whatnot. So it's tough to live on one salary alone. So we're seeing this in different industries, like in film and television, or VFX animation. We're not clear on what restrictions there will be on spouses and common law partners of, say, digital artists. Some of whom may be highly skilled, but they're categorized at tier level 2, for instance. So the way in which you get a work permit is determined on which tier level you are at. And so depending on how the rules play out, like we just got a bit of a directive today saying keep an eye out for the policy that's going to come into effect next Tuesday, because next Tuesday is when we're going to tell you who's impacted, and then it's of immediate effect. So it's really quite a drastic reversal, and very haphazard, I suppose. I mean, it's very fly by the seat of your pants, because you don't know what's happening until it happens, and then you're like, "Oh, well, sorry, we didn't anticipate that," and now you're out of luck. So there's a lot. There's a lot happening. It's a lot different than kind of the giddiness, as I said when we had our
I'm
last.
listening to you. I'm listening to you, Brian. I'm thinking that's kind of like what we're going to be in next week, kind of flying by the seat of your pants as well. We're going to be in the same boat.
Well,
because employment authorization for some folks
Yep.
may also be at risk, and we will know. It's kind of TBD, to be determined still.
I mean, we have the H1-B modernization rule that Marcela was talking about, which has the CRA congressional rules, so to overturn it is a little bit more. But when it comes to benefits of spouses
Yeah,
and
like H4 spouses, work authorization.
that can be done through executive order.
right.
And there's a lot of inconsistency with the rhetoric, so we're not really sure what direction we're gonna hit business on. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, we're kind of like prepared on all sides. It could come
Yeah.
from all, but we're ready. And I think the one thing that we are concerned with too is, I don't know if this is the case in Canada, but they're gonna do a lot of compliance with companies, a lot
Yeah.
more than they used to. And I don't know how they plan to organize
Yeah.
that. Sometimes when government says that, and I've worked at government for a long time, you wonder how they're gonna organize that and how they're going to divide which companies. But,
And that's also in the modernization rule, site visits. Site visits are now, expect them to come knocking at home. Your remote workers from home, you have to, and if you don't have to let them in, but if you don't, the officers have the right to revoke your H1B. So now it's not really, if you want to come in, come on in. No, I think you're gonna have to, let them in.
It's very there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of change. Certainly, the incoming administration is impacting how we're responding. Because the funny thing is, like, when you were joking at the outset about Canada as an alternative for those who don't get their who aren't selected for the H1B lottery, or they can't get their green card, we'll just park them in Canada for a bit. We actually changed our kind of L1 rules as well, where we clarified certain labor market information about prevailing wage, as being indicative of whether somebody truly is a specialized knowledge worker or not. We reinforced the requirement for kind of bricks and mortar operation, that somebody answering the door. You can't park somebody, reporting to somebody in Texas, living in North Bay. North Bay, I'm trying to think what the U.S. equivalent might. I mean, Anchorage, but Anchorage is bigger. But like there's going to be a great deal more scrutiny, I feel, on what is like a legitimate business need to have certain types of foreign workers here. Because I mean, increasingly, like with a remote workforce, if you can do it 800 miles away from the employer and never reporting to that space, Maybe you can do it in Costa Rica. Maybe you can do it at home. So it's kind of like a fundamental, a bit of a crise d'identité. Like, we're wondering about what it means these days to have immigration when people can be remote. So I anticipate a lot of the difficulties that I've always seen south of the border that you guys have always had to counsel employers on, like, be careful of this, and here's what you got to think about here. Whereas we used to be a bit more footloose and fancy free, and perhaps a bit more, there was opportunity to be creative, and we could kind of, I wouldn't say cajole, but like you could look at rules as like not absolute certainty, and you could always make the argument or make the case, I feel. And I think we're gonna have a lot less flexibility going forward. And I think a lot of employers looking to park people in Canada or to relocate them more legitimately. Park is like, have them wait out a year so they can recapture time, or get their L or whatever, versus like a legitimate business need to send them to Canada and perhaps have them stay. But I think that they're going to look at this a lot more critically, and more importantly, is like those folks who do relocate probably will not be able to transition to permanent resident status as easily as they could before. So I'm getting a lot of queries from U.S. employers whose employees have come to Canada, have set themselves up prior to all these changes, and now they're asking for employer support I need employer support to get me a green card. And there's no business like need to have the person here in the first place. The only reason they're here is because they couldn't stay in the States. So everything is fundamentally different. Everything's been turned on end. It's great if you're an immigration lawyer, because the Reddit rooms and the Google chats and what my cousin did 4 years ago. I mean, it's all different. So I think that, like, for us, we're going to be called upon more frequently to provide advice and to help people navigate what's feasible and what's not.
I
Anyhow,
think that,
it's exciting.
yeah, I mean, I think we're in the same situation. It's still, I mean, it sounds as that is, take away all the rhetoric and all the noise and all the flash. I mean, Canada does sound as unpredictable as the US in terms of where they're going, but they're going towards a more, I don't know, stricter view.
Restrictive, yeah. I mean, it's also,
Restrictive view
part
of-
of it could be reactionary, right? What's happening in the US, preparing in advance of, but
Yeah.
I think between Mexico, US,
And
Canada,
Canada.
always, we're gonna have, give and take of these policies.
I think they're gonna be taken, and maybe we have to look at where they're gonna be put. Is the
Right.
deportation process in Canada, difficult, lengthy? You don't have the kind of numbers that we have where it could be, catching, they go and they're out on bond.
Right. Well, some of the critiques of our current government right now is our immigration numbers are kind of dependent on those million plus people departing voluntarily, right? So
That's nice.
you
Ask
have
them politely to leave.
you know,
Okay, that's,
um,
it's a tool.
well, I was going to say it's a bit like it's the joke about the English policeman or police officer, stop, or I'll say stop again. you know,
Exactly.
um, so I think what will happen is I expect a lot of folks will go underground. I mean, culturally, depending on where people are coming from and whether their families have mortgaged the farm to get their son or daughter to Canada to be the linchpin to bring the rest of the family. Canada's not as we're not as big on family-based immigration as it is in the United States. But in Canada, it's typically based on economic immigration. But I suspect that there's going to be some cultural taboos or suggestions that somebody may have not succeeded because they weren't able to stay in Canada, and Canada's not the United States. So I suspect a lot of people will go underground and will stay and work illegally. And these are people who probably went to proper schools in Canada, or they came here properly. but they just never went home. We don't have the kind of the ICE um, I don't think we have that infrastructure. I don't think we're not used to mass deportations that President Trump is talking about, right?
Right, and that is confusing
Yeah.
too, because he is also talking about doing away with the federal government bureaucracy in certain agencies and letting a lot of layoffs occur with the federal workers. I just don't know how local law enforcement is gonna handle all that. It seems like you can't execute an enforcement plan that way. It
Right.
doesn't sound, we're gonna lay off,
Yeah.
but we're going to, leave it to the local police to decide. They don't know how to read an immigration, they don't know what a green card looks like, they don't, I mean, it's going to be, obviously, this is not a strategy that is viable on its face.
Right. And I think the thing I would say is that our system is like you. I'm sure we don't, you don't practice. Like I'm not off to hearings all the time, trying to stop my clients from being deported. I would say if I meet my clients, I've done something wrong. So generally, um, like it's not what is in my bailiwick, but typically, like I just think the numbers are just they're massive. And if people do choose to go underground and choose not to leave, I think what will happen is that our kind of enforcement, the Canada Border Services Agency enforcement arm, is like will have to grow like tenfold in order to realize what is needed if things go that way. Um, it's really very interesting, and there are lots of rights. I mean, I wouldn't say right of appeal, but you can seek judicial review. You can do there are a bunch of things you can do. You can seek like you claim people are claiming refugee status from India out of coming out of um, community college. Having had the F1 equivalent get OPT, and then all of a sudden it's refugee status after 7 years in Canada or whatnot. And then there's due process. You've got to go through the mechanism. I mean, it probably is not as challenging as doing a case from Sudan or from Syria or something like that. But nevertheless, you have certain rights as a foreign national claiming these protections, and until the process is done, I mean, you could always run into a nice Canadian you want to marry or shack up with, or a Canadian permanent resident. You might get a
Same here.
pre-removal. So
They're
it
not
actually.
Canadian.
I mean, except a US citizen.
US.
Same here. We could, have that could be one of the questions you ask when you meet other people. What's your citizenship?
Yeah, it's going to be very very interesting, and I think the fact that the government may change. I mean, we were on a call earlier today with a client, and it wasn't a question of if, it was like when, and like what would be the result. Like, and it's not clear how. Like, it's not even clear if there's a change in prime minister, like leadership of the existing party, let alone a brand new party who have not been in power for many years. What is likely going to happen? Now, the other thing I might add is that our express entry system, if managed properly, it's actually not bad. Like I think the thing is, it has to be a little more um, targeted in who we're looking to transition to permanent resident. Like, you can't just have all software developers, and data scientists, which it's good and easy to have these individuals transition to permanent resident status because typically they're high wage, and um, they'll pay their taxes, and they'll establish nicely as new residents of Canada. But of course, they need homes, and they need doctors and nurses and other allied health professionals to take care of them. And our population is growing significantly. That's actually one thing that I would add is, like, as part of our immigration planning, like, we're looking to have negative population growth over the next 3 years. Like, we're like completely independent of new permanent residents. We're looking to have our population stabilize and actually decrease if we can. And hopefully we can be a little more targeted in who we select so that we can get folks who will be able to do the things that we need to manage the continuing growth of the economy. Like I'm thinking healthcare, I'm thinking construction, um, things
I mean,
along
I
those
think
lines.
that in the United States, there is a big concern because businesses truly say we need these workers and we gotta make sure that people are listening. I'm not one to side with business as a general rule, but I think these workers are there, I think they're speaking the truth. Do you know? I mean, I don't think they're out there lying about it. They really do need these workers. We really need to see our growth. Our borders, we have, it'll be interesting to see where, if Canada's being cut and Mexico's being cut, if everyone's tightening, let's see where the volcano erupts.
Right. Well, and you must face this as well in your, maybe it's different in the United States, but I'm half the time I'm going to a client who said like, we can't lose this person. They are essential to our operations. They are this, they are
Absolutely.
this.
It happens all the time.
And then you're like, well, person's been with you 9 months. You're paying them only about $68,000 below the prevailing wage for the role in the most expensive city in Canada. Like, you're sure this person is not a CFO, but probably more akin to a bookkeeper? And then you start looking like, is this really absolutely necessary for the operations, or are they trying to support them because they're really really nice and it was a real pain to recruit previously. Sometimes it's you can see right through it. Sometimes it's legitimate, and um, I think the thing is that our numbers have just become so distorted. Who's here, what they're being paid, why they took the role, as opposed to waiting for a job that was perhaps more appropriate, or a wage that was more appropriate for the role. And you just see that people have become desperate simply because it's a numbers game and they know that they can't stay unless they do this. So it's a very challenging time. And I kind of remember speaking to a client about a year and a half ago, and just saying like, not everybody's going to be able to stay. This is before the crisis we're in now. But nobody ever said that everybody was going to be able to stay and that this is going to be a slam dunk or things along those lines. So it's very interesting to see that we find ourselves here. I mean, I think if I'd been a little more, and again, I didn't have the numbers before me. I didn't like, they're always trailing, so you see it after the fact. But part of me about a year and a half ago was saying like, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't, like, hopefully they've got their, the finger on the pulse to see what this means. And then you come to realize they had no idea whatsoever. And I can't say if it was necessarily the bureaucrats or the politician or kind of a combination or a miscommunication. But anyway, we're here, and a lot of people are struggling to be able to find ways to stay. Now, if I just to add to that, a lot of people who did make it here are saying, well, you know what? It's not the promised land that we thought it was. And I'm wondering if President Trump thinks that Greenland was green and like full of lovely little places, or really he should be looking at Iceland. I don't know, but
I don't know.
Canada is. I think a lot of people who have come here thinking they're going to land good good jobs are finding themselves sorely disappointed, and they're kind of giving up on the Canadian dream. Um, are you?
I mean,
You
I
must.
think Canada has very, very, very high taxes.
Oh, that too. Yeah, yeah.
I
It'll be.
think, that's,
Yeah, the benefits.
yeah, but you also have the benefits.
Yeah.
And then the benefits are questionable. Some people like them, some people say that it's not all that. You can only see a doctor once in a while. Someone needs surgery, they can always wait, so they're in pain at home for many, many months.
Yeah, it's
I
kind
don't
of
know
a
if that's true or not.
It is and it isn't. I would say. I think it depends. But I think the nature of healthcare is changing both in Canada and the United States. Like if you're
Oh,
looking for
yeah.
a primary care physician, chances are you're not going to find a primary care physician in either country. You're probably going to go to a group that shares responsibility, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think is at play in healthcare. But I would suggest that because of the way our constitution is structured, so Canada generally at a federal level has responsibility for immigration, but the provinces and the territories have responsibility for property and civil rights, including things like medical licensure. So, like if you get licensed in Alberta, it doesn't mean you can practice medicine in Ontario and the like. And so it's actually quite challenging for many foreign trained physicians and other allied health professionals to get qualified and licensed to practice here. So I don't know if that's quite the same in the United States. I mean, maybe if it's, if there's
I
like
do.
family based immigration, it might be challenging to become a doctor or a nurse, but it can be quite difficult. And just the way people practice medicine in advanced economies or is often different, and it's challenging for people who come from a different system to be able to be licensed, independent of whether they independent of the immigration process. So there are a whole series of things at play that make the whole journey quite, I think, difficult for folks.
Every state is different as well in the United States, but I do want to do some quick takeaways if we don't mind. So we don't know what's going to happen, but we do know that to be prepared with your H1Bs, your registration, expect delays, expect more delays, and expect uncertainty.
Yeah.
Which with immigration, sometimes it's calm, you don't have to expect too much. With businesses, I think hopefully they're flexible enough to kind of have those changes and willing to be flexible with all the changes. And they also have to be nimble enough that there could be changes at the last minute. They could say, we're gonna close a consulate for this or that, or,
Yeah,
you know.
we're definitely emphasizing delays, potential delays, careful being caught out,
And
for all our travelers.
and-
Yeah,
and for H1Bs, now that we're talking about the cap season upon us, everyone's like, well, can they go to Canada? Well, no.
Well,
I mean,
so-
yes and no.
Yeah,
I mean, this is not,
it may not be a long-term solution.
it's not gonna be a long-term solution like it used to be, and I don't think it's moving towards a more liberal immigration policy.
Yeah. I
Canada.
would suggest, like, if I think the thing is, if people look at it holistically as kind of a like long-term planning, and there's a business need, I think you can do it on a case-by-case basis. If you've got somebody coming from China who's got an advanced degree in IT or cybersecurity, they're going to be looked at very carefully from a military civil fusion perspective, from a security background check. Like, that person's not coming to Canada in 3 weeks time or even 8 weeks time. It may be, if you think about this strategically, you look about business continuity, you look about setting up an operation whereby people are in Canada, reporting to people in Canada, and it's like, you have set up a new campus that is doing business in Canada, and its business is to service the US or other entities abroad, or work as part of a concerted going concern, as opposed to simply parking people here from time to time because the business deems it necessary. It may be possible, but I think you do have to be very, very careful about it. And I think I would suggest that our take on what is an L1B equivalent, so specialized knowledge workers. So if you've got somebody who's been with you for 3 or 5 years, the new base threshold for specialized knowledge workers is about 2 years. If it's below that, it's not that it can't be approved, but officers are instructed to scrutinize it much more heavily. Because if you're coming out of OPT, maybe it's a 3-year one, and you have an advanced degree and there's some prior work experience, I think that case can be made. But if you're like, we really like this kid, he's a quant guy, it's a financial services company, but the kid's been with you for less than a year, and he's like, you look at his photo, it's the one that he did to go to the United States in the first instance, and he's took he's like 20 21 or whatnot, it's going to be very hard to make the case to bring that person to Canada without something more. So I'd never say never, but I think it's not going to be as straightforward as it once was.
I think that is correct. What do you think, Marcela, just wrapping it up?
No, I think we're kind of in the same boat with the H1Bs as well. We're gonna go, well, I mean, some things we were given, we had some gifts in the modernization, but we also have some more restrictions as well. So
Right.
we'll see.
Well,
Challenges ahead.
challenges. It'll be. I think for Canada, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with the next government, if there is a next government.
There's going to be a next
Well,
government.
the next prime
Maybe we'll
minister.
buy Canada.
Yeah, maybe maybe Canada will buy it.
And I would just also add, like, I'm getting lots of calls from people from the United States who are like, "Oh, we just want to move to Canada, and we're going to do this." And you're just like, "Where, under what rock have you been living to think that you could just?" I mean, maybe that's a
Relocate.
Well,
I mean, they just
it's the 51st state because they think like perhaps President Trump, like they're just assuming that it is. But of course, you have to, like, if you two would like to come up and set up an office in Toronto or Vancouver or Winnipeg, you
maybe
certainly
right there. I can see a couch with my name on it back in the background there, Brian.
Yeah.
Hi, hey Brian, it's me, Marcela.
I mean, it's doable, but you've got to, all the same stuff you'd be thinking about for an E2 equivalent. Like, you're going to be more than marginal, investment at risk, Canadians being employed. It's not just we're a little uncomfortable here. We want to move to Canada. It doesn't quite work like that. So it's all these things, and I think what's going on in the South just makes it more exciting.
Yeah, I think that immigration in the US, it's going to be a
I
very
just have to
interesting
say,
time.
I find it funny when you say the South, because we're the South this time, when we talk about the South, it's a different.
We
South.
mean like the South, like Florida and
No,
or
Talk about
Mexico.
south of the border.
Yeah, south of the border.
I'm thinking like Pennsylvania and
From
Vermont.
No.
Exactly, the South.
That's so funny. You didn't have context. It was
Brian, we can't thank you enough for coming on and being part of this. It's such an exciting time between the US and Canada. And, I know we hear a lot, HR is always like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Compliance, audit, this, that. And they have operations in Canada and they're always wondering, what does that mean for us?
Mhm.
And, I think it's good that you're here to help that and say, just, it's not gonna be, this easy walk across the border. And as far as Americans who woke up one day and said, hey, yeah, maybe I will become a Canadian citizen. I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, I don't know.
You got to get rid of your current spouse and find a Canadian, right? Like,
Yes,
right away.
exactly. Find a Canadian spouse, get a divorce, get a Canadian spouse. There you have it. Easy matchmaking will be our next thing.
We'll have
you.
to bolster our family law ranks in both of our firms to sort that out.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Marcela.
Brian.
Thank you, everyone.
Good to see you.